Elijah was still on the wrong foundation of responsibility, of knowledge. We're assuming some things, but it does not appear to be love. So what happens next? Elijah prays for rain, and rain comes upon the land. This is deliverance now. This is a Savior. And all is so right until Jezebel gets word of what has happened. That all her prophets have been slain, and this is what happens with Elijah. And she sends word back to Elijah saying, so be to me if in 24 hours you're not as dead as they are. She sends out a death warrant on Elijah. And this unnerves Elijah a little bit. And he actually flees out into the desert. And he falls into what almost appears to be a suicidal depression. And we can pick this up in 1 Kings 19 and then verse 4. So here Elijah has done all of these great things, incredible things. He's tried with all his might, with all his strength, to turn the people back to God, to do what God asked him to do, going to enormous lengths. And now Elijah says, you're it. If by this time tomorrow you're not dead. So it says, Elijah himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die and said, it's enough now, O Lord. It's enough. Take my life, for I am not better than my fathers. I have failed. Elijah has failed his powerful, demanding God. He is no better than his fathers. He hasn't succeeded in turning back the children of Israel. Just kill me. Take my life now. It's enough. I'm no better than my fathers. Elijah understood the powerful God who would send fire from heaven and consume the sacrifice, who would strengthen him to slay the prophets of Baal. He did not understand Matthew 11, verses 29 and 30, where we read of the God who now comes to show us what God truly is and what God truly desires. Matthew 11, verse 29, where Jesus says, or in verse 28, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you shall find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my load is light. That's not the God that Elijah understood. Elijah understood the powerful, demanding God, not the humble and meek God who seeks a relationship of love with his children, not one of responsibility and knowledge alone. So what happens next? Well, basically, an angel comes to encourage Elijah. Elijah is depressed. He falls asleep. An angel comes and wakes him up and says, here, eat. And he eats, and he falls asleep again. An angel comes back a second time and says, here, eat. You need strength for the journey. And on the strength of those 2 meals, Elijah goes 40 days and 40 nights into the wilderness and comes to the mountain of God, comes to Mount Horeb. And there he meets God in the mountain. And we might think, here is the mountain of fire. Here is Sinai, where the law was given, where the people couldn't even approach the mountain with the cloud and the huge sound like a blasting trumpet, and the fire and the storm. Or was it the mountain we saw where Jesus goes up and instructs his disciples and says, blessed are the meek? Well, Elijah does go to the top of the mountain. And there is a huge windstorm. It's just tearing the rocks apart. And there is an earthquake shaking the earth all around him. And there's a firestorm which comes and fills the mountain. But God wasn't in the powerful breaking wind. And He wasn't in the rock-rending earthquake. And He wasn't in the firestorm. Then comes a still and gentle voice. It says, "Elijah, what are you doing here?" And Elijah says, "I've been so zealous for the Lord, but they've torn down your altars and they've slain your prophets, and only I am left." And God basically says, "That's all right. Don't worry, Elijah. I've got a plan." And then He tells him to do various things, who he's supposed to anoint, who he's supposed to meet. And I find it fascinating how God proceeds to teach the powerful, responsible, knowledgeable Elijah about love. First, by showing him all the power of God, but then God not being in that powerful God that Elijah thought about, but in the small, still voice. But then He goes one further. And part of this plan is Elijah is to take as his assistant Elisha. And Elisha and Elijah couldn't be more different from one another, day and night. As opposed to the task-oriented go-getter Elijah, Elisha is a very kind, people-oriented man. And we see this when Elijah encounters Elisha. It's almost comical. Maybe I get lost in the differences in the culture, but I look at this account and I really just about laugh. In 1 Kings 19, we see the account of Elijah meeting Elisha.